स्टडी IQ IAS, अब तैयारी हुई अफोर्डेबल।
Hello students, welcome to StudyIQ's initiative, the podcast. I am your host Dipansh Moorjani. So get your juices flowing because it is time for the podcast of the day. In the last episode of the podcast, we had discussed all the provisions related to national emergency, and it becomes one of the most important topics for any UPSC aspirant. So all the new listeners out there can listen to our previous episodes not only on YouTube but also on all the audio streaming platforms like Spotify, Hubhopper, Apple Podcast, etc. In today's episode, we are going to discuss President's Rule. We will also discuss the provisions related to financial emergency. Sir, first things first, can you give us some basic information about President's Rule, which is also termed as state emergency?
During President's Rule, President can act on report of the Governor or otherwise it is satisfied that a situation has arisen in which the state governed is unable to perform its duty in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. President may issue a proclamation for President's Rule. This concludes that the President can also act even without the Governor's report. Article 355 justifies it by saying that the center is obliged to ensure that the government of state is carried on in accordance with the provisions of Indian Constitution. In the circumstances, proclamation by President is called the proclamation due to the failure of constitutional machinery in state. By this proclamation, the President may assume to himself all the powers of Governor or he exercised or some of the powers of Governor he exercised on any authority in the state. The President may declare that the powers of the legislature of the state shall be exercised by or under the authority of Parliament. The President may make such consequential provisions as if he feels necessary or desirable for giving effect to the object of proclamation. The President cannot assume to himself any of the powers vested in high courts or suspend the operation of any provisions of the Constitution relating to the High Court.
Sir, what is the duration of state emergency and how does it gets approved by the Parliament?
A proclamation shall laid before each House of Parliament for approval and shall remain operational for at least 2 months. After the expiry of this period, the proclamation ceases to operate. If the proclamation is issued at the time when the Lok Sabha has been dissolved or the dissolution of Lok Sabha takes place during this period of 2 months without approving the proclamation, then the proclamation survives until 30 days from the first sitting of Lok Sabha after its reconstruction. If the proclamation is approved by Parliament, it will remain in operation for 6 months. Parliament may extend the duration of proclamation for 6 months at a time. No proclamation shall remain in force more than 3 years. After the expiry of maximum period of 3 years, neither the Parliament nor the President shall have power to continue a proclamation and the constitutional machinery must be restored to the state.
Sir, India is a federal country. And when we talk about imposition of President's Rule, then what is that one thing that justifies imposition of President's Rule in our country like India?
Article 355 justifies this provision. Article 355 refers to the provisions in the Constitution that states that it shall be the duty of Union to protect every state against external aggression and internal disturbances and to ensure that the government of every state is carried on in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. The Article 355 is a part of emergency provisions contained in Part 18 of the Constitution of India from Article 352 to 360.
Sir, when we study President's Rule, it becomes mandatory to understand the relation between Article 356 and Article 365. So can you throw some light on this relation?
It is this duty in the performance of which the center takes over the government of state under Article 356 in case of failure or breakdown of constitutional machinery in a state. This is popularly known as President's Rule. Article 365 says that whenever a state fails to comply or to give effect to any direction from the center, it will be lawful for the President to hold that a situation has arisen in which the government of the state cannot be carried on in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution.
Sir, what are the consequences of President's Rule?
The President acquires the following extraordinary powers when the President's rule is imposed in a state. He can take up the functions of the state government and powers vested in the governor or any other executive authority in the state. He can be declared that the powers of the state legislature are to be exercised by the parliament. President can take all other necessary steps including the suspension of the constitutional provisions relating to any body or authority in the state.
Sir, is there any scope for judicial review in case of President's Rule?
The 38th Amendment Act of 1975 made the satisfaction of President in invoking Article 356 final and conclusive, which would not be challenged in any court on any ground. However, this provision was subsequently deleted by the 44th Amendment Act of 1978, implying that the satisfaction of the President is not beyond judicial review. Hence, we can say that even the President's rule is under judicial review.
Sir, after understanding all the provisions of state emergency, we are curious to know about financial emergency.
Financial emergency empowers the President to proclaim a financial emergency if he is satisfied that a situation has arisen where the financial stability or constancy or credit of India or any part of its territory is threatened. In other words, it means whenever the President is contained that the economy of India is in danger, he may proclaim this emergency. Financial emergency has never imposed in India till date.
Sir, what is the duration of financial emergency and can you tell us something about its approval?
A proclamation declaring financial emergency must be approved by both the Houses of Parliament within 2 months from the date of its issue. It survives until 30 days from the first sitting of Lok Sabha after its reconstruction if at the time of proclamation the Lok Sabha was dissolved or the dissolution of Lok Sabha was taking place. Once the proclamation is approved by both the Houses of Parliament, the financial emergency continues indefinitely. Its time is unspecified till it's revoked. The repeated parliamentary approval is not even required for its continuation like other 2 emergencies we have studied. A resolution approving the proclamation of financial emergency can be passed by either House of Parliament only by a simple majority, and financial emergency can be revoked by the President any time by a subsequent proclamation. Those proclamation does not require the parliamentary approvals.
Sir, in the previous discussions, we came to know that national emergency had some consequences. Then, President's rule also had some consequences. So, what are the consequences of financial emergency?
The implications of the financial emergency are the President may reserve all the money bills or financial bills after they are passed by the state legislature for maintaining financial constancy and the credit of the nation. The President may issue directions for the reduction of salaries and allowances for any class of persons serving for the state, union, or Supreme Court or High Court. Thus, during the proclamation of the financial emergency, the union acquires full control over the state's financial matters.
Sir, with this, we have discussed all the provisions of financial emergency. So, can you give us a conclusion that justify the emergency provisions provided by our Constitution?
Emergency provisions were amended under the Constitution for the security of the country and for the protection of its people. However, these provisions delegates excessive power of executives. This affects the federal character of the Constitution. and the union becomes all powerful in situations of emergency. Although the need for emergency provisions is understood, however, there are some changes required in the mechanism so that there is no violation of fundamental rights of the citizens and there is no misuse of the powers vested to the executives for their political purpose.
Sir, thank you for giving us the information. Dear listeners, it is time to call it quits for this episode of the podcast, but we will be back soon with another topic. So stay connected with Study IQ and keep studying. You can listen to Study IQ Presents the podcast on various audio streaming platforms like Spotify, Hubhopper, Apple Podcast, Cuckoo FM, etc. Links are pinned in the comment section below. Thank you.